Good evening, everyone. My name is Tina Burnside, and I'm the co-founder and also the curator of the Minnesota African American Heritage Museum and Gallery. And we welcome you to our Black History Month conversations. And tonight's presentation is Artificial Intelligence and the Black Experience. And we have an exciting presenter, Elizabeth Adams. And I'm going to introduce her and read her short bio and then turn it over to her. And also we'll leave some time at the end for questions. And if anybody has any questions, you can type them in the chat or in the Q&A. Elizabeth Adams is a Forbes 15 AI ethics leaders showing the world the way of the future. Elizabeth is a highly sought after resource for executives, small business owners, nonprofits, educational institutions, and community leaders who are looking to expand their knowledge of AI ethics and leadership of responsible AI. For over 2 decades, she has studied the science of business and technology influences on society while leading large-scale technology initiatives for Fortune 500 companies and various government institutions. As a scholar practitioner, Elizabeth has developed her expertise working with technical and non-technical leaders, creating alliances with community that translate theory into results. Elizabeth is pursuing a doctoral degree at Pepperdine University with a research focus on leadership of responsible AI. She serves as the Global Chief AI Culture and Ethics Officer for Women in AI. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tina. I'm going to go ahead and share this presentation. Let me know if you can see it. Yes, is that a yes?
Yes, we can see it.
All right, wonderful. Thank you, Tina. I'm so excited to be here. Hello, everyone. As Tina said, I am Elizabeth M. Adams, and I bring you greetings from Minneapolis, Minnesota, where I'm based. I'm very excited to be here today to share a bit of my work and my research as it relates to AI ethics, responsible AI, and AI and the Black experience. So I look forward to taking questions at the end. So if you have them, feel free to pop them in the chat or just hold them until we get to that portion of the presentation. So I curated this presentation to cover both business and social perspectives because many of us are working at companies or organizations that may be using AI-enabled systems such as automated resume screening or to improve workflows or to streamline operations. So my hope is that by the end of this presentation, you will have a better understanding of why so many people are working in the AI ethics space and responsible AI, ensuring that technology is developed safely because it can have impacts far and wide. And also, you might decide for yourself that this is an area of interest for you to get engaged. So let's get started. Before I continue, I want to show you a quick video of what AI or artificial intelligence is about. Artificial intelligence, or AI, is the ability of a computer program or machine to think, learn, and perform tasks like humans, but at a much faster pace. Artificial intelligence is all around us, and we have all experienced AI in some way. For instance, AI is used to predict traffic patterns. It's also used as an option to unlock your mobile phone using facial recognition. In addition, streaming services such as Netflix use AI to make predictions about what movies or TV shows you may like. Behind these examples is a computer program powered by AI to predict who you are, what you may like, or as mentioned, how best to handle traffic. These are just a few examples of how AI is used in our world today. All right, so when it comes to innovation, this is the kind of example of innovation that thrills some of us and that we can expect to see in the future. Elon Musk presented the Tesla bot on August 19th of 2021, a humanoid robot that uses the Tesla vehicle AI and is intended to be pleasant. It's created with the intention of making us fall in love with it, because it can do dangerous or repetitive or monotonous activities like going to the grocery store. And although that might not be particularly hazardous, it might be a bit monotonous for us all. Gail King and Mark Zuckerberg also conducted their first ever virtual reality interview on August 19th of 2021 in Facebook's new Horizon Workgroups, a virtual reality tool that allows coworkers or families or friends to communicate in virtual spaces using the Oculus virtual reality headset from Facebook. This will be an experience similar to any other team meeting or family meeting, except you might be discussing sensitive information and you will have to turn over some data in order for this environment to work. There's nothing wrong with innovation. I love innovation, but I want to share one more example with you of innovation. So the Astro household robot is Amazon's first home robot, and it was in development for the past 4 years. And if you're interested, you can sign up on Amazon to be notified when it becomes available. And it's available, well, when it becomes available, for $999, which is expensive for most of us. But many of us are those who like to be early adopters or early recipients of things such as purses, shoes, or computers. We're pretty familiar with early adopter cost. Now, I was particularly intrigued by this robot because there may be an option if you have family members who are older, they live out of town, or they may live by themselves. It could give them a sense of connection. And me personally, I'm pretty thrilled about the prospect of trying this out at an assisted living facility where I have a family member. But I've been on the waiting list since September, so we'll see. So in order to create these super cool and innovative products, there's a process called technology development, and you end up with your product or service. And during the technology development lifecycle, this is where engagement across the entire organization happens, or just across the board in general. And although I've highlighted a few disciplines here, everyone will be impacted by AI, so there's a place for all of us to contribute. But so far, that hasn't always been the case. Those who have been developing our future technology for the past several years have not always considered Black and Brown communities, communities of color, and vulnerable populations. So I want to turn our attention to a couple of examples of what happens when the technology development lifecycle is not inclusive, or it does not include inclusive perspectives, and why it's important for us to be aware. So these headlines on the right are a result of what happens when our technology worlds and our social worlds collide. All of the resources, the time, and the money allocated to work on what seems to be a very exciting, innovative initiative through the technology development process on the left, only to end up with what's happened on the right. Only for this technology to end up in society where communities sound the alarm. Well, what was missed? Well, there are many stories behind the headlines, and there's a different kind of development happening. There's advocacy development happening, which is the process of educating community, coalition building, educating industry, and policymakers on why some AI-enabled technologies are creating discriminatory or biased outcomes. And in my work and research, the missing link is humane engineering, the inclusion of the community experience as non-negotiable in how technology is developed, how it's sold, and used in cities and businesses across the world. Now, this next example really motivated me to explore AI bias and the need for responsible artificial intelligence, which is what I do, help organizations create processes, policies, and procedures that guide inclusion in the development process. And as part of the research conducted during a civic tech initiative I co-led, one of our team members looked into various computer vision models to see if we could find any errors in what's called predictive labeling, which in this case is when an AI-enabled system makes predictions about what might be in an image. And in this computer vision example, we used an online application that derives insights from your images to detect emotion, understand text, and more. Well, in both pictures here, a temperature is being taken with an infrared thermometer. But with the image on the left of the lighter skinned person and the lighter skinned hand, the algorithm predicts one set of labels: technology, electronic device, photography. and possibly a mobile phone with a 68% probability that the image includes technology. But with the image on the right of the darker skinned person and the darker skinned hand, the algorithm predicts a different set of labels. A gun, photography, firearm, or a plant with an 88% probability that this image contains a gun. So bias happens in predictive algorithms and predictive labeling when there is not enough diversity in the training data that trains the model, when it doesn't include an equal mix of ethnicities, genders, ages, and skin tones and associations. And this is what causes the errors. But for now, let's take this one step further. In this example, one of our coalition members lightened the image to see if the prediction would change. And indeed it did. And once the image was lightened, a gun was not part of the prediction. So these are the technologies that are being sold by companies and law enforcement around the world. And many of them are using these tools to augment their work. So I think in my research and my work, it's unfair to place the burden of correcting these issues on one person. Algorithmic bias, algorithmic harms is a shared leadership responsibility, and there needs to be an integrated ethical approach, which is what I call ethical tech design. So when you see these things that I'm showing you, I want you to keep in the forefront of your mind that because of the absence of some sort of AI ethics, basic standards, procedures, policies that guide tech development and data governance, everyday citizens are calling out these things. And this is because the impacts to communities of color, Black and brown communities, is really too great. And all of this was missing during the entire life cycle, a lack of a diverse or inclusive lens. So there are many people working in the AI ethics or responsible AI space, and I want to highlight just a few here. Brian and Candice Brackeen founded Lightship Capital, a $50 million venture capital fund focusing on supporting people of color, women, members of the LGBTQ community, immigrants, people with different physical abilities, and others here in the Midwest who have been overlooked and underfunded by traditional venture capital. The firm invests in consumer-packaged goods, e-commerce, sustainability, artificial intelligence, and healthcare-focused early-stage companies. And next, Dr. Joy Bloom-Weenie, who is a computer scientist and a digital activist based at the MIT Media Lab. She founded the Algorithmic Justice League, an organization that looks to challenge bias in decision-making software. The organization does this by blending art, advocacy, and research to highlight social implications and harms of AI. She is credited with calling out bias in facial recognition technology. And she learned this by accident when she tested her TED Talk photo on a facial recognition system, and it didn't recognize her face. So Dr. Bloom-Weenie's research is actually why I pivoted from 20 years of technology development to more specifically responsible AI. And I'd like to show you a short video by Dr. Bloom-Weenie called AI Ain't I a Woman?
My heart smiles as I bask in their legacies, knowing their lives have altered many destinies. In her eyes, I see my mother's poise. In her face, I glimpse my auntie's grace. In this case of deja vu, a 19th century question comes into view. In a time when Sojourner Truth asked, "Ain't I a woman?" Today, we pose this question to new powers, making bets on artificial intelligence, hope towers. The Amazonians peek through windows blocking deep blues as faces increment scars. Old burns, new urns, collecting data chronicling our past, often forgetting to deal with gender, race, and class. Again, I ask, ain't I a woman? Face by face, the answers seem uncertain. Young and old, proud icons are dismissed. Can machines ever see my queens as I view them? Can machines ever see our grandmothers as we knew them? Ida B. Wells, data science pioneer, hanging facts, stacking stats on the lynching of humanity, teaching truths hidden in data, each entry and omission, a person worthy of respect. Shirley Chisholm, unbought and unbossed, the first Black Congresswoman, but not the first to be misunderstood by machines well-versed in data-driven mistakes. Michelle Obama, unabashed and unafraid to wear her crown of history, yet her crown seems a mystery to systems unsure of her hair. A wig, a bouffant, a toupee, maybe not. Are there no words for our braids and our locks? Does relaxed hair and sunny skin make Oprah the first lady? Even for her face well known, some algorithms fault her, echoing sentiments that strong women are men. We laugh, celebrating the successes of our sisters with serena smiles. No label is worthy of our beauty.
All right, so a bit about the video. That video is a few years old, and there have been great strides in facial recognition technology. There have actually been laws passed to limit the use and bans with certain conditions. So I wanted to just make sure that people understand that there is a place for all of us to get engaged in the technology development life cycle. And you may not think you have a place, but you do. If you're in marketing, customer care, or finance, trust and believe that AI is making its way around all kinds of organizations. So as I wrap up here, I want to just kind of leave you with a few things that you can do to get better engaged. One, ask questions in your own organization. Ask, do we use AI here? And if so, ask, do you have AI ethics principles? Those would be the guidelines that ensure transparency and accountability and explainability in your product development lifecycle. Host a learning event like this. Host one for your friends or your colleagues or fellow students, and start talking about innovation and how we can be centered as leaders. Ask your employee resource groups to host events. Connect with community organizations to learn more about STEAM, science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. Connect here locally with the Minnesota STEM Partnership or with the YWCA or the YMCA or Boys and Girls Clubs, or even your universities. Follow your curiosity. I understand that not everyone wants to be a technologist, and that's okay. But I would add that AI is already a part of our lives, and so it's basically unavoidable. So learn what you can. Get involved with your local commission or a board or a community. So I hope that during the short presentation, you were able to get enough information concerning the ways in which innovation can not only improve our lives in our workspaces. We talked about the Tesla bot and the virtual reality meetings and the Astro robot, but also why we need to be vigilant as a community to ensure that these systems are not designed with bias. And so educating different generations is very, very critical to me as we are all adjusting to these new AI agents and humans working and living together. So I wrote this book, AI and Little Petey, to help parents and caregivers talk to children about safe technology. And it was an amazing passion project that was well received. Well, that's it for me. And I want to say thank you all for the opportunity to share a little bit of my work and my research. And I want to turn it over to Tina Burnside and and thank the Minnesota African American History Museum and Gallery for your support.
Well, thank you, Elizabeth, for that eye-opening presentation. I'm sure we have some questions in the chat, and if not,
Yeah,
I have
let's take a look.
some questions also. So let's see. Just gonna scroll through here.
See a couple of my colleagues' areas there. She and I actually have spent a lot of time talking about AI. Thank you so much, everyone, for participating. Thanks for the offer to purchase the book.
I do have a couple of questions.
Sure.
1 second, there is one in the Q&A. Elizabeth, what motivation did you have to encourage you to go into the field you're in now?
Well, I've always been in technology. That's a great question. For many, many years. And I've always been a pay advocate, a gender advocate. I've always been an advocate for people with different physical abilities. And so that's always just been my thing. But a few years ago, I saw that video, AI, Ain't I a Woman, and it immediately changed my focus to wanting to uncover and discover what types of challenges there might be in artificial intelligence as it relates to Black and Brown communities, Black and Brown people. So I started venturing into this space about 5 years ago. And so it was really that video that kind of set the alarm for me, even though lots has changed. There's many, many different ways to play in the AI space. I specifically just deal with responsible AI and making sure that companies and organizations all around the world are setting up their technology development life cycles in an inclusive way. Great question.
And then we have another question. Do you have suggestions about how to convince leadership to invest in ethical review?
Well, I think that's a good question. And I would say it depends on the culture of the organization first. When I first approached the organization that I was working with, there was a bit of a resistance. So what I started doing was hosting learning events with my colleagues, and that took off. And pretty soon, the next thing I know, the general counsel and the chief privacy officer were involved. So I would say start where you can. If you're a part of an ERG, an employee resource group or business resource group, wherever you are, start where you are. Host learning events with community organizations. But I would say start crystallizing your message so that by the time you are talking with executives or leaders in your organization, you have a solid message and you have solid data.
And then I have a question. Can you tell us a little bit about your work with the Minneapolis City Council, which led to the ban on facial recognition technology in Minneapolis? And exactly what is the ban? Because I'm sure probably a lot of people aren't familiar with it.
So sure, I became very, very interested in how my city was using AI in its businesses, but I didn't just kind of start with that. So several years ago, I was appointed to the Racial Equity Community Advisory Committee, where I, along with my colleagues, were working to help advance the racial equity goals for the city. But I also had a lens on tech transparency. So I started asking questions. I started meeting with policymakers and city staff to understand how it was being used. And from that, formed a coalition with a number of concerned citizens that was called POSTME, Public Oversight of Surveillance Technology and Military Equipment. And our initial goal was not to ban technology. It was really just public oversight of surveillance technology, and that being drones, spy planes, body cams, facial recognition technology, license plate readers, a number of things that we might not consider surveillance. And after the murder of George Floyd, our work became particularly motivated by the uptick in law enforcement's use of facial recognition. And so we decided, along with policymakers and some city staff, to pull out of our ordinances a ban on facial recognition. And so on February 12th of 2021, the Minneapolis City Council actually banned facial recognition use in the city of Minneapolis. And basically what that means is that anyone using it has to get certain permissions if they need to use it, because it can be used to help with to help protect children who might be involved in sex trafficking or have been kidnapped or a number of different things. but there needs to just be some accountability. And so that was part of the effort that I co-led here in Minneapolis.
Okay, that's great work. We have another question. Ethics and binary ways of conceptualizing can lead to problems in our world sense context, and our world sense context is important. How does this compare with binary code in AI changes?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that. I would need a little bit. I see that question there from John. Maybe John can expound a little bit more, and then we can actually talk about that further. It's a great question.
Okay. Let me see if I can turn on John's mic. Hold on one second. John, would you like to expound on your question?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. That's very nice of you. I guess I was just so curious because I know, again, I don't know too much about like AI and code, but I know it's a binary of like assigning information, and kind of like binary ways of conceptualizing the world around us, like good, bad, right, wrong, black, white, are problems since context can be so important to be able to gauge like situations. So I was curious, like when you're talking about like that relationship with ethics and holding these principles, what that relationship is like when it comes to just like looking at our faces, like a binary way, is this a man or a woman? Like gender has a spectrum. So how does AI, what is the relationship with like AI and the ways of conceptualizing this person as something outside of that binary?
Yeah, that's actually a very, very good question. And facial recognition companies are struggling with that. And that is why a lot more biometrics type solutions are becoming available. I don't know if you've ever traveled out of an airport and you use Clear. So they're using your irises to determine who you are, but you are absolutely right. But in my work, my specific focus is on data annotation and data association. So whether or not the system determines that it's a man or a woman, for me, it is about ensuring that and your question is very, very important, but because we're just not there as an industry yet, we're starting with what we have. And so my particular focus is making sure that a person, like we saw in the example, that is holding an infrared thermometer, someone somewhere, a human, actually associated that as being a gun. And that's what's called data association and data annotation. And so those are the areas where I'm more focused. But I think your question is a very good one. It has been raised by a lot of people, and also in communities where they wear masks in general. How are they able to tell? Yeah, it's a good question, and I don't have an answer totally about that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
I had another question, Elizabeth. Have you done any work in AI and hiring bias?
Not particularly. Again, my focus has just been on the data associations and data annotations that end up with these results that we've seen today. However, I am very familiar with resume screeners that sift out information. So your name, where you went to school, possibly your zip code, if you added that on your resume. Also, there are video AI systems that have been known to cause some errors because they can't read, they can't see Black and brown people, or they'll say that they're not there. They can't really understand our facial expressions. So there are a lot of challenges with that. And I actually had one of the headlines that showed that there's bias in these hiring systems. And so my work would, if I were to engage with a company, it would really be about creating those ethical principles and walking through their entire life cycle. Because I think sometimes what has happened in the technology space is we think that this is just a technology problem, and it's not. It goes all the way through the entire life cycle where everyone needs to be involved. Marketing, as I said, customer care, legal, finance, anyone who can see that there's an issue should be able to have a safe space in their organization to raise questions. So hopefully that answers.
And I had another question. Do you see that you talked about AI ethics and that companies should incorporate that into their workplaces? Do you see that as probably like something that is going to become prevalent across the board with all companies, where, you know, companies have various policies to govern the workplace? And so will this also become one of those policies that will become mandatory, or do you think that it's going to be limited only to like the larger corporations?
I think a couple of things. One, if regulation doesn't get involved, then we're actually asking companies to kind of self-regulate themselves. And so I think that they should, and many are, and it should be treated just like a cybersecurity program or your code of conduct or whatever it is. So if you're working and you have to take those tests every year to say that you understand what the cybersecurity concerns are, AI ethics should be embedded in that. It is a shared responsibility for all of us to pay attention to that. But there are lots of policies that are being drafted. There's the Algorithmic Accountability Act that's on the table. The FTC has come out with strong language last April that basically said if your algorithms discriminate, they'll come after you. And to just make sure that just because you have AI ethics in place, that you've actually tested those. So back to your question, I would hate for a company to wait for a company like, or an organization like the FTC to regulate. They should do it on their own. And so I have seen over the last 5 years, more and more companies are actually adopting it. I actually work with a couple that actually make their employees sign the AI ethics guidelines.
Okay, that's great. And then we have another question in the chat. It says, I'm not a technologist, but I'm trying to be a jack of all trades. How can someone outside of the field contribute now?
Yeah, if I was outside of the field, I would, as I mentioned, follow my curiosity. And I'll just use this really weird example. So let's just say I liked fishing. I would figure out how AI is being used in the fishing industry today. And then I would go about and see, if I was interested in AI ethics, I would go out and see if there were any cases or any stories about there being bias in the algorithms for fishing, just as an example. But if I wanted to be innovative, I would still do the same thing and learn as much as I can about how AI is being used in the fishing industry. And so whatever your particular interest is, I would say start with just a quick internet search to find out, what's out there, and then figure out in your city or in your school or in your organization where you might be able to start, inserting yourself.
Okay, and then I'm just going to check the Q&A. It looks like we have another question. How prevalent is AI technology in the medical field? The diagnosis and prognosis of people of color is distinctly different than Europeans.
Yeah, it's very, very prevalent. We've seen lots of headlines and stories about Black and Brown communities being misdiagnosed. And if you think about it, so the way an AI model is trained, it's trained on data. So if there isn't enough data about us in the model, then the system is not going to be able to say that we have this particular health challenge or we need this particular solution, right? And so that's what is happening in the medical field. There's also AI that is helping doctors determine whether or not someone needs to stay in the hospital. And that again is skewed. And so that is why we need everyone, no matter what your focus is, to be engaged in making sure that these technologies include enough data, include enough information about us so that when these algorithms are used, they're fair and they're equitable.
Okay, and I think that was the last question. So I'd like to thank you for your presentation. It was very enlightening, and also I would encourage people to go out and research more about it. And then also just want to invite people to join us for our remaining 2 presentations that we'll have for the rest of Black History Month. And so thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you everyone for participating.
Thank you, Tina. Thank you for being such a supporter of my research and my work. I greatly appreciate you, and thank you, everyone. Have a fantastic evening.
Thank you.